Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Quorum Podcast. This is where academic medicine meets remote, austere, and resource-limited areas. Welcome back to the program. This is Aebhric OKelly. This week, we are with Bill Vasios. Bill is a physician assistant who started out as an 18 Delta, and he had several other 18 series jobs. Bill, welcome to the program.
Well, thanks, Aebhric. I appreciate the intro and the invitation to get on your podcast.
So tell us a bit about yourself and what's keeping you busy.
The short version is I'm a doctoral student right now with Liberty University Online, getting a PhD in education with instructional design and technology, and I'm simultaneously doing a simulation fellowship at East Carolina University, and both are working together towards my topic, which will be interprofessional simulation-based medical education.
So you're doing a fellowship as well as writing a doctorate?
Yes, but they work together. It kind of goes along with the mantra of work smarter, not harder. One of the biggest obstacles to a dissertation is finding sources for your data. And if I'm in a simulation fellowship where I have tons of opportunities around me and my topic is associated with simulation, then that makes it more conducive to having, the opportunity and access to data to collect for the dissertation, and it works together. So on this pace, at least the schedule right now is that I'll finish my doctorate, and then afterwards, about 6 months later, I'll finish my simulation fellowship.
So you started the fellowship, but that's going to take longer than your doctorate.
Right, because the fellowship normally is a 5-day-a-week, 1-year fellowship, but because they're working with me and I've been very upfront with both the dissertation and the fellowship, that I'm doing both at the same time, and why I'm doing both, being very open about that. The 1-year simulation fellowship has been spread out over 2 years so that I don't overwhelm one and kind of knock both of them out of the running.
You're doing your fellowship, and that generally is an all-day, everyday event that is 1 year, but you're doing that as well as taking your doctoral classes and writing your doctorate.
Correct. And the only way that works is to spread my simulation fellowship over 2 years. So it's, essentially 20 hours a week versus 40.
Tell us about your doctorate. What precisely are you researching, and why did you decide to go with that university?
Well, I decided to go with Liberty University because it was 100% online. And although I'm retired from the military, I suck at being retired. But I do like to travel, and having the option to travel while still pursuing the doctorate was too good of an opportunity to pass up. It allows me to do all the other things that eventually we'll talk about during this podcast, and it doesn't tie me down to one location. I decided to go with a doctorate in education because I consider myself a lifelong learner, and I enjoy teaching and sharing knowledge, so that applies. And of the options available, the instructional design and technology matched what I would like to do in the future, is design remote education. Because we are a mobile society, we are in different locations. You can teach at one time and share it with whomever is interested. So that all made sense to me. There were other options out there, but that seemed to align the most with what I'd wanted to do, and checked the box and said, let's do it.
So you're passionate about online learning, and I'm guessing this is specifically for SOF medicine. Is that correct?
Well, that would be my intended target audience, but common sense is common sense. And as far as medical education, the elbow is always going to be the elbow, as far as I'm concerned. And I think that what makes SOF medicine different is the geography of the end user, not where the lessons are coming from. So you get somebody that's been in similar situations, right? Talking about it, putting something together that could impact and potentially benefit somebody that's going to those situations or going back to those situations. That seems to make sense to me.
You are interested in designing a online learning philosophy. What would be your perfect online learning system? What would be the best, world's perfect way for you to teach the SOF medic online?
Well, online, that's the caveat. The best way to do it would be to teach them, side by side and put them in situations, simulation situations that they're likely to encounter or have encountered and would like a better outcome next time. I think breaking the components down and giving the end user the option of looking at specifically the element that they have questions with. If I'm teaching somebody just generically, if I'm teaching some subject that has 5 steps, you might have a soft medic that's good at steps 1, 2, a little question about step 3, which leads into more questions about step 4 and makes step 5, different. And so they can go back and look at step 3 as many times until it clicks. And then that makes step 4 make more sense, which makes step 5 more successful. So having it broken down into the essential components that explain some of the sub-elements, that allows people that gloss over a certain topic in class, and the student doesn't want to stop the instructor to go back and explain a step because everybody else in the classroom doesn't want to hear it, and they get it and the one student doesn't. That gives that student the opportunity to go back and just study the one section that makes the most, that's the most confusing at the time until it clicks. That's the idea, because everybody learns differently.
Right. That's the challenge, isn't it?
Well, it's a huge challenge. And if you're in class, you can only ask so many clarifying questions before everyone in the classroom gives you the stare down of like, shut up, you're between us and lunch, or you're between us and the 4-day weekend. It's like, stop talking. And this gives them the ability to go back at their own leisure to figure out how to understand that concept. So then everything else makes sense going forward. Or at least they advance forward in their knowledge of the topic.
So the best way to teach is a mix of online and face-to-face. How would you set this up? So you have a huge budget, Bill, and you can create the world's best soft medic training program. And how would you balance that with online versus classroom, and how would you use the classroom face-to-face to solidify what they learned online?
Well, how long is your podcast? Yeah, that's an unanswerable question in this format, really. And then unless we can just basically fast forward to having a holodeck where you can put somebody in a situation in a total immersion room and run them through a scenario and say, no, run that back at, the 2-minute mark. That's we're still in science fiction phase at that. But I guess there's people working towards that, which is cool.
There's the virtual reality, there's the augmented reality, there's
Mixed.
the mixed, and of course with new AI coming out, is that the future of soft medicine training?
All right, well, here's my caveat. All of that is nice, but the training is not about the technology. It's about the experience. And so when you're teaching, it is as simple as starting an IV or starting an IO or doing a medical procedure. They need to experience that. There's different ways to simulate that experience with all of the available technology that's out there. But in the end, you could literally just lay a mannequin down and do sticks and rags. Now that's very low fidelity up until incredible high fidelity, which is your virtual and mixed and augmented realities. There's a huge spectrum. And so what's best is whatever you have available with the time that you have available before you actually have to go execute it. So is that a dodge to your question? Kinda. But we could really go down a deep rabbit hole to answer that question, and I don't know if this is the right format to do that.
That subject is so vast. I don't know who, someone needs to write a doctorate focusing on that concept.
My topic is interprofessional education and simulation-based medical education. How does that marry up together? That's what I'm exploring, and so I'm working towards it. It's not going to solve that whole problem, but it's going to combine a couple of different elements in a way that I think should be considered using a theoretical framework that will help understand when somebody's going to understand a certain topic. At least that's my theory at this stage of the game. I'm sure that you could fill the internet with what I don't know right now.
It's a challenge now to look at what is the best option for getting the knowledge that placed online that can be placed online, and face to face that can be face to face. When I went through the Q course in the early 90s, there was no online option. There was books, and it was just face to face. And is that changing now in the schoolhouse, or what would be the perfect option for creating soft medics?
I don't really know what's going on at the schoolhouse right now, so I wouldn't venture to speak on that front. But I do know that information there's tons of information out there. I think the question right now is filtering through the excessive amount of information. And sometimes, like even like this discussion you and I are having, there's going to be one little gem that somebody's going to go, oh, and they're going to key on one little aspect that you say or I say, and they're going to run with that little nugget of knowledge that somehow causes what they're thinking internally, that they're grinding their gears trying to make it fit. All of a sudden, the clutch is going to pop and the gear's going to go in perfect, and it's going to make perfect sense, and they're going to run off and do something great off of one 5 to 10 second comment that you or I make on this in this discussion.
Hmm.
How do you filter that out? I think the short answer is to continuously thirst for knowledge and just listen to what's out there, and you'll stumble across something. Or if a certain location can generate enough credibility that they're putting that out more often than not, then you kind of go back to that location, whether it's a physical location for a school or a company that does training or a podcast that puts out consistently good information. I mean, there's an abundance of good information, and in that it's surrounded by a nice cushion of not so good information.
As faculty, it's a challenge to address that issue. So if people come to us in the classroom with their phone in hand and saying, well, this right here is going completely against what you're saying, and they're looking at the website, it's like mom's healthcare. There needs to be some sort of direction from educators to give a right and left limit on this learning, and with the information that's out there. There's tons and tons of information out there, and so few good resources.
You remember the parody of, well, if it's on the internet, it's got to be true. There
Hmm.
are people out there that don't really understand that that was a parody, and that if they saw it on the internet, then it's fact. So yeah.
We encourage that at the college, and we have them download Medscape because it's free. It's not as good as Up to Date or one of the other ones, but we encourage them to use a reputable resource online to answer some of their questions. Or if they come to us, it's like, well, what's the best drug for this? We can come back at them and say, you tell us. What does Medscape say, or the CPGs? So the DHA has now put out over 100 CPGs that are evidence based. They're fantastic teaching tools, and we're incorporating them in the classroom.
I think all statements of fact should be backed by some credible source. Sometimes it's your experience in a certain area, and that has a certain amount of credibility, not in the academic world per se, but within the soft medic. If you have a good soft medic or somebody that does something and they're consistent and this has worked and you can see that it's worked, then you can take that and eventually the literature should catch up to it. There's what is it? Environmental based evidence versus evidence based medicine. Um, it works every time I do it in the field. And so do you do a study on that?
Mhm.
Or do you just take it for anecdotal evidence and run with it because you don't have time or the resources to do the literature, do the true study of it? Some things just work and you don't need to study them, and others, they do need that evidence behind it.
It's a challenge as an educator to create the right curriculum for the lads on the ground, for soft medics or for the remote paramedics, because you have resources to draw from, and only looking at the evidence based options. But still, when I first started teaching, it was just the Nancy Caroline paramedic textbook and the 3,500 slides that came with it. There, it's and I think it's harder now. It's better, but it's more difficult now to teach, to create curriculum because of the vastness of evidence-based information out
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that I went through the last easy course as a medic.
there.
I don't doubt that. I don't doubt that at all. I think as educators, the part that you can't replicate in online education is the discussion surrounding the decision process. How do you discuss something that you don't know the answer? How do you break it down into smaller chunks that you do understand, and then how do they fit back together?
Hmm.
Right. Part of my pre 18 Charlie training was that I used to, disassemble my bicycle when I was a kid and put it back together. And apparently I was a better engineer than Schwinn because I had always had extra parts. I could design a more efficient bicycle than Schwinn or, anybody else because, like, hey, look how much weight I saved. I don't need to put all these extra parts back on there. That's the decision process and discussing how do you solve a problem. That's the SOF environment. Here's what you're supposed to do in a well-stocked and staffed medical treatment facility. Well, we don't generally work in that location. So how do you make good medicine apply to bad locations? And that takes
Mm.
understanding the concepts behind what makes it a good medical practice and how do you adapt when you only have, less than ideal supplies, men, and equipment. That's, that's your MacGyver degree, if you will.
It's one of my passions to face that question because the Nancy Caroline's paramedic textbook covers city-based paramedicine. Our paramedics, our remote paramedics, are not going to be in the back of an ambulance all the time, not going to
No,
be 10 minutes away from a bright lights and cold steel. So I find it fascinating and a challenge to create a curriculum for a soft-minded person to be able to address that issue.
I think that's a great goal. And then the question is, how far do you break the elements down? Do you just assume? Do you make an assumption that they're going to know how to do steps 2 and 3, and you can go from one to 4 when you're designing a curriculum? Or do you go back and you get your feedback from the students and realize, hey, you made a pretty good leap from this concept to this concept. Is there an intermediate step that we should develop to help us bridge that gap? So
Hmm,
it's a continuously iterative process.
indeed. Before we started this recording, you and I both agreed that we weren't going to go a deep dive into topics, but
Failed.
unfortunately, this is a passion for both yourself and myself as well, and we're going to be spending weeks and weeks and weeks on this podcast. But so yeah, we can definitely talk about the philosophy of education specifically for the remote paramedic and the soft medic. But we're here to talk about Bill. So where I think you're trying to defer this whole concept away from that. But let's go back. This is about Bill. So tell us about yourself and what's keeping you busy. We got the whole doctorate thing going, but tell us. I mean, how many 18 series MOSs do you have, and when were you on the teams? What was your experience there, and what groups were you with?
Well, actually, I think I've given you more of a practical insight into me, is that I generally don't want to talk about me. I'd rather talk about other things. But so that was telling in my obfuscation of the original intent. So I was the short version is I was a communicator radio operator in the Rangers when I first came in for the first 4 years of my military service. At some point during that time in the Rangers, I took a combat lifesaver course and realized that I thought medicine was pretty cool and I wanted to be a medic. And this was in the late 80s. And I wanted to go to Special Forces to be a medic and signed up for the Bear reenlistment program. So I signed the contract. And at some point, the recruiter said, "Hey, you have to do this pre-course before you can go to Special Forces." And at the time, it was called Special Forces Orientation and Training (SFOT). And I went to the third class. I
Wow.
believe it was the first class that had the weapons that we could carry with us. I remember carrying them, and I'm pretty sure that we were the first class. Some fact checker can confirm if the second class had it or not, but I know we did, and it just added a new component. And after finishing selection, they said that I could be an 18 Charlie engineer, and I said that I wanted to be a medic, and they said, "Well, you're not a medic." And I said, "Well, I'm not an engineer," and then they offered to let me stay in the Rangers as a commo guy. So I decided to be an engineer and went to the Q course to 18 Charlie, and I was doing well. And I had a bad night and made a mistake and got a DUI. And at the time, that was beginning to be frowned upon in special forces. You remember the lore of all the SF guys had a divorce, a
Hmm.
DUI, a bunch of other things. So I was started my collection of things, and that's not to make light of it, but it was, I was young and, as one can be when they're in their early 20s. And So I finished the MOS portion of the 18 Charlie course before losing my court case and then getting worldwide assignment. My worldwide assignment was to Okinawa with 1st Battalion, 1st Special Forces Group to be
Wow.
a commo
Well
guy
done.
again. Somebody was
Nice.
looking out for me. Somebody was definitely looking out for me. And I didn't realize it at the time because once again, immaturity was the top uh, trait that I expressed at the time. But I went out there and I did 2 years and kept fighting to come back. And when I came back, once again, wanting to be a medic, somebody said, the 18 Bravo course is a lot shorter and the success rate is a little higher. You should be a weapons guy. And so I went back and I did the entire 18 Bravo course successfully this time. And in the process, I got credit for 18 Charlie
Nice.
because I had finished the MOS portion of it, but I hadn't done the Robin Sage. And the sequences for when I went each time was different. For the Charlie course, it was small unit tactics, the MOS phase, and then Robin Sage. And there wasn't any of the extra things that are tacked onto the course now. And then when I
Hmm.
came back as through the weapons course, by then they had switched it and they did the MOS phase and then phase 13, which was small unit tactics with a short break going right into Robin Sage.
Hmm.
And that's how I went through the Bravo course. So afterwards, I get credit for the Charlie, and I go to a team as the junior Bravo, and I spend a couple years still wanting to be a medic. There was a shortage in the force needing medics, and so I requested and was offered time to go to the 18 Delta course. And so I finally got the chance to be an 18 Delta, and thankfully I passed. And then went back to third group. All of this time was in third group. Spent a few
Hmm.
years there and realized that I really like medicine and that I wanted to pursue medicine and decide to be a PA. Spent a few more years from like 95-ish to 2000 as a Delta, and then got
Hmm.
out to go to civilian PA program because at the time I had close to 15 years on active and the military needed more 18 Deltas than they needed PAs, and I was pretty dead set on becoming a PA.
Oh, you ETS and went to PA school and then came back
They,
in.
no, I didn't ETS. I had re-enlisted. I was an E7 at the time, so I had re-enlisted for indefinite. So officers could resign their commission at any time as long as they didn't have any service obligations. But as an enlisted guy, it wasn't until they re-enlisted, they offered the option to re-enlist for indefinite that you could resign. And so I had re-enlisted as an E7, 18 Delta, and then thinking that they would accept me into the IPAP, inter-service PA program, and then I would be a PA and stay in the military. And I was committed to being in SOF and in the military, but they turned me down, and I was displeased with that decision and applied to civilian schools. And as I got in, the whole process, I was updating my command of, hey, I'm applying to civilian PA schools, and if I get in, or if I get past the interviews, or I was updating them and my progress in the application process, so that each time that I was accepted, my packet was accepted and I was granted an interview, and then I successfully got through the interviews and was, all the process to be accepted into civilian PA schools. By the end, everyone in my chain of command had committed to supporting me if I got in. And then when I got in, they were like, okay. They signed the paperwork and I got out and transferred from active duty to the Guard while I attended PA school.
Hmm.
So
Were you SF guard as well?
no, I was not, and that was a geographical decision because I went to a school that was close enough to my normal residence. I kind of viewed it as a deployment, meaning I was just going to go to the first year of school and go home on the weekends and study the tests and all the basically study for tests and just do that process. And then when I got into the second year of PA training, where you're doing your clinicals, I basically lived in the Fayetteville area and did all my rotations at Womack. But in the process of where I was, the closest National Guard, SF National Guard unit was 6 or 8 hours away. I didn't believe that I would have the time to shoot and go do the drill thing on the weekends. So I just basically took I was in the North Carolina Guard, so I worked with the headquarters medical element, their Stark element, and I couldn't honestly tell you what Stark meant.
Oh, so you did it as a medic and not a 31 series commo guy.
By then I was an 18, I was an 18 Delta, but when I transferred to the Guard, it wasn't an SF unit, so I was a medic. I don't know what honestly, I don't remember what they put me down on as paper, because I had other MOSs. Because of my Ranger time, I had 11 Bravo, I had Uh, regular Army, I was a 72 Echo, which was a telecommunication center operator before my 18 series. I was never an 18 Echo, but I did test out while I was in Okinawa to be able to do Morse code to SF standards. So
The 2020.
15 and 15.
Oh, you had 1515.
We had 15-15.
Oh, the last easy day, I tell you.
Hey, there's a trend here. And they were like, crap, he passed. We got to make these standards harder. We can't do that. We can't have that. But yeah, so I honestly figured when I left Okinawa to go back to the Q course, there's no way that they would not make me be an 18 Echo. So that's why I learned code, because at the time, that's why people failed. And I wasn't going to put myself in a situation where I was going to get in the Q course and fail again, because that's a horrible feeling.
So the only MOS you didn't get was Echo.
I am not an 18 Echo.
You're lost. It was a good MOS, mate.
There's plenty of communicators out there, but it was purely logistics, right? Because a dead battery weighs exactly the same as a live battery.
Yeah, but we give it to everyone else. We give it to the Bravos, is what we do.
Yeah, but if the Bravo uses their equipment, bullets, it gets lighter. The Charlie, if you blow stuff up, it gets lighter. And even the
Yeah,
medic, if the medic uses their supplies, it gets lighter. You don't want the medic to use all their supplies because that means people are hurt. But yeah, it doesn't matter what you do with the radio, that battery weighs the same.
that is
So,
true. And those Prick 104s were not light, let me tell you. I jumped so many of those. I'm still in therapy over it. Yeah.
absolutely.
So, Bill, did you have to go to selection again?
No, and I was prepared to do that. That was part of the process while I was in Okinawa. For 2 years, I kept saying, "Hey, I'll come back. Why don't you just recycle me?" I'm an idiot as a kid, right? Why don't you just keep recycling me in selection till you feel that I've paid my penance, and then let me go back into the Q course? And of course, that was a stupid request, but
Hmm.
my intent was to show them like I'm serious. I understand I messed up. You know, whatever I got to do to, pay my penance and then get me back into the course.
Wait, how many Robin Sages did you have to do?
One, one, because that's the only thing that kept me from graduating as a Charlie was I didn't do Robin Sage, but I did small unit tactics twice. The star exam was interesting because once you pass it, they keep a record of who passes, at least the way I understand it. Um, when I went back to do phase 13, which was small unit tactics, and then Robin Sage, I theoretically could have just walked into the woods, went to sleep, and the only penalty for that was I wouldn't have passed it in that phase, but I had passed it at one point before. And was explained to me by somebody that I wouldn't have gotten the weekend off before Robin Sage because then I would have had to do retraining and testing. It was just easier to pass the star than it would be to do all that other stuff. So
I remember in my selection was in '95. I did make the start because I was in third group at MID, so I did tons and tons of time out in McCall. So I passed star on the second chance, and then they gave us a third one. And I remember people saying, "I'm just going to go to sleep. I already passed it once. I didn't have enough guts to do that, so I went out and did it again for the third time." But I did hear people like just skiving off, having a kip, and they still passing because yeah, you pass star once and you're good.
yeah, it just made more sense to me to just do it again and and be done with it. I was pretty comfortable with land nav, so I didn't view it as a challenge. Don't get me wrong, it still sucked, but it was easier just to knock it out and be done with it versus having to do it multiple times. And yeah, no.
I was lucky and went through in April, so it wasn't super cold, and you didn't have the wall of green thistle trying to get a running start and push yourself through. It was a good time of year.
Yeah, my times were January,
Oof,
so your visibility in the bog was a little bit easier.
but frozen water, yeah, that would suck.
Yeah, I think Chemical is geographically positioned to where the water can be as cold as it can be without freezing, which is just a sweet spot for training.
I did Robin Sage in January. We had 3 or 4 centimeters of ice on everything. It was brilliant. So you started off and you kind of surfed around the team on different jobs. You then decided that you wanted to be a PA and you became a PA and you went back into SF as a commissioned officer. Is that right?
Yeah, when I left active duty to go to PA school, I stayed in the National Guard in the headquarters medical unit for North Carolina. And then during the process to get my direct commissioned, because once I finished PA school, then there was a direct commission in the Guard. There was a Guard unit, Bravo Company, 3rd Battalion, 20th Group, that was about to deploy to Iraq, and so that there was a gentleman that actually went small unit tactics with me and remembered my name. And so when I was going through getting my commissioned, they were co-located up at the headquarters unit, and they said, "Hey, we can use him as a PA. We'll deploy with him." And so that definitely accelerated my process to get my commissioned, so I could deploy with them, and that's what I did. So I went to Iraq with them, and while I was over there, because I had almost 15 years of active duty, and then my Guard time, and then my post PA graduate commissioning delayed, and all that process, I had close to 17 years in Guard math. And so I figured that if I went back on active duty for 3 years, then I could get to a 20-year retirement and, be a PA for the rest of my life, and everything would be great and all that fun stuff. And so thankfully, I was able to go back on active duty and work with USASOC. Buck Benson was the SF command PA at the time, and was able to get me back into a PA job on active duty. And instead of 3 years, I ended up doing like another 14.
And you wind up in Europe. How did that happen? How did you wind up in Europe? Well, I met you in Stuttgart and on the NATO SOCM course. So how did you wind up there?
Well, my second retirement job. I mean, I came back on active duty to get my 3 years to retire, and then at the end of that time, we were working on the ultrasound stuff with the guys in 1st Battalion, 3rd Group, Drew Morgan, Dave Hubler, Jared Eldred, definitely the guys that were working on that. And we came up with a plan to what they should do with ultrasound, point of care ultrasound, the SOLCUS program. And then instead of me retiring, I ended up going to SF Command and teaching that program and running that program with them, with Colonel Drew Landers and them. And so as the SF Command PA for 4 years, I was doing the ultrasound stuff, and then I got into the PA management, and I was actually trying to find a PA, an active duty PA, to be the first active duty PA at Special Operations Command Africa, SOCAF. And surprisingly, there were wonderful candidates, but none of them were positioned where they could make the move to go to Germany for 4 years or 3 years. And so at the time, it just worked out that we figured out that I could do it after looking, because I seriously wasn't considering that job. I was going to finish my time out and then retire and play golf and do all the things that I theoretically could do when I retire, and that just didn't work out. And so I decided to take the job. I went to SOCAF for 4 years, and then that's where we met. Because
Well, that's right. You were doing Africa. You're doing the snake stuff in Tanzania.
Yep, Uganda, Tanzania. Yeah, so we went down there, and I'm teaching the NATO SOCMs. I think we did some ultrasound stuff. We did some snake stuff. Went down there with April Verlo was doing the preventive medicine stuff. So it was it was fun. Germany was a great tour.
And the college was teaching the Trop Med Week for the NSOCM. So you mentioned SOLCUS. So explain what is the SOLCUS program for SF?
So SOLCUS is the Special Operator Level Clinical Ultrasound, and that was started with Sean Keenan, Drew Morgan, Dave Hubler, and those guys. They had Drew, I think it was Drew's crazy idea to train ultrasound, teach the medics to use ultrasound, because he's an emergency medicine physician, among many other things. And they were working with Rob Blankenship and some of the Sonosite guys to train, to get machines, to purchase machines, and provide training to the medics with the concept of training them to use ultrasound in remote locations, which is an amazing concept, but at the time it was a horrible idea. And the reason why I say that, somewhat sarcastically, is that the TO&E only allowed for one ultrasound. So with 40 plus medics and one ultrasound, it's really difficult to decide who gets that tool. So you needed a plan Because, the time is valuable. Like, there's 1,001 things that an 18 Delta has to do. And teaching them one more thing that is not supported by equipment is a waste of their time. It really is, in the big picture. And so we had to first answer and solve that problem, at least provide a potential solution to how do they get more machines. And now they're more prevalent, but that the same problem still exists. The machines might be there, but they're put into a location. Maybe the medics don't know where they are or don't know that they exist there. But I think it's less of an issue now than it was, 10 years ago when, well, what is it now? 2008, 16, quick math, 16 plus years ago. That was, it's less of a problem now than it was then for sure.
Well, that's the difference between you originally got Turbo M's, didn't you, which are a suitcase, and now you have IQ and IQ Plus.
Yeah, there were laptops, the flip laptops. Yeah, and I think, well, definitely they weren't point of injury tools then, unless your air base and your clinic where your fob took a mortar round or took something there, and your casualty collection point was just outside your clinic. I mean, yes, then they could be point of injury. They could be used at that location with the proper training, obviously, for triage and treatment and diagnosis. But that concept wasn't fleshed out at the time, at least not at the medic level. If you have an emergency room, even the ER docs at the time, they were still getting to that. The newer residents, the newer emergency medicine residents were trained in it, but some of the older ones, the silverback ER docs at the time, were like, I never needed that tool. So overcoming the why do I need that technology kind of thing was an issue at just different levels, but it definitely was not an issue at the SOF level because they didn't even consider it an option. I don't think there was ever a doubt that the SOF medic could learn how to use ultrasound. They, if you pass the selection process and any of the Q courses, you are innately qualified to learn pretty much anything. Like, you've demonstrated that you can learn any complicated procedure or situation. Like, you just have the ability to learn things once you've passed that process. I firmly believe that. Whether it's everyone gives the Bravo crap, but I'm sorry, you got to make all these weapons work, and you understand how they work. And yeah, no, I'm sorry, they are still highly qualified and trained and capable people. So, but it's fun to make fun of the Bravos. It's fun to make fun of them. It's just like they make fun of the medics, but you can only make fun of each other because you have that high mutual respect.
So now the ultrasound program for special forces has progressed, and now everyone, at least in first to the 10th, which we're going there to teach a 2-day ultrasound, every team has an IQ. Is that the same SF wide?
No, I don't believe so. I think there's different options. I think they have, well, I mean, whether they have a specific device or just any ultrasound device. I believe that the ultrasound devices are definitely more prevalent and available to the medics, but I don't think that it's been standardized. At least I think that there's more options now than there was, a dozen years ago, and they're getting smaller.
They are, definitely. I mean, IQ is super small, but there's other ones out that are even smaller than that that are very portable and not expensive. 3 grand now instead of 15.
And I think that the good news is that's going to continue. That direction is gonna continue. It's going to become more prevalent, more capable, more user friendly, more affordable, and that's a good thing. And I would really like the soft medic and just in general to be able to use any. They should be device agnostic. It shouldn't matter what device they grab. Once they understand the concepts of the ultrasound, then it's just taking the quick 5-minute in service on how to apply what you already know how to do for scanning to whatever device you have in front of you.
I agree. And what do you think is needed for the 18 Delta to remain competent throughout the year in ultrasound?
Access to scanning.
Like how many? What numbers are we looking at?
That's a good question. That's for sustainment, and I think the cheap dodging answer is that it's different for everybody, and I believe it has to do with training to a certain level of mastery. And this is expectation management, so I'll digress just slightly. When you teach somebody how to do a task, how long do you train and how do you train to get them to the point where they have the sustainment of riding a bicycle, right? You're in Europe, so chances are you've probably ridden a bicycle more recently than I have, but I have zero doubt that you could put 5 different bicycles in the front yard and I could walk out there without any preparation and pick any one of the 5 up and ride the bicycle. Like I can do that. So how do you train any medical procedure to that level of sustainment? Like if you just give me an orientation on how to do ultrasound, if I don't immediately scan and reinforce whatever you just taught me, how long am I going to retain that? Like there needs to be, there's the training, then there's the immediate use, then there's the, the wobbly period where you're figuring out, oh, that's what you mean by this, and this is what you mean by fanning and scanning and sliding and, in the near field and far field, all the terminology. Like how do you put that into a location to where you can retain it? And then drill that so it becomes second nature and it gets into that long term, it transfers from short term to long term memory. Like what does that take? And the generic answer is it depends on the person and it depends on what you're training and how quickly are they able to utilize it and with a real patient, because I remember learning certain medical diseases, but until I had a patient that had that disease, it was in that novelty memory phase where I had to remember for the test, but I didn't have a practical application with a real patient to really drive it home to remember, so that the next time I saw those symptoms, it's like, oh, that's this disease and this is how I treat it because that's how I did it last time, or that's how I did it the last 3 times or 5 times or 100 times, right? Like if you don't have that practical application of learning procedure X, how long are you supposed to sustain that knowledge until if you have to apply it again? So that's a whole field of education. It's one that I'm willing to walk down and try to figure out, because that's a problem. Because if a medic has 1,000 things that they have to do, they can't do those 1,000 things every day or every week.
That's a challenge for Sergeant Major of the B team to figure out what readiness of each team is. But it's I don't know. It combines 3 of my passions. 1 is SF, 2 is ultrasound, and 3 is education. So how is it possible to? So I say we're heading to 10th group, so we have them for 6 days. So I need to look at this and how can I teach these 36 medics or 36 teams of medics? So hopefully there's more than that. Something that's going to sustain them with those 3 passions. Yeah, it's difficult because I know what teams are like. You got to shoot, move, and communicate, and you got to keep rucking, and you got to do your 4187s and all the other admin bollocks that most of us are now spending in laptops instead of going out and doing cool guy stuff. And then throw in ultrasound. That's is there a cost benefit to that you can explain to the B team sergeant major?
Well, so here's a parallel. So the sergeant major understands the sustainment requirements to maintain proficient in a skill. That's why we shoot as often as we do. That's why they'll drop hundreds of thousands of dollars on a shooting school and they'll balk at $5,000 for a medical course. It's they don't think it's important because they know that they have to shoot. Like the first rule of medicine is to return fire from point of injury. So you get that, right? But but then how do you sustain all the rest of the stuff? And it falls into that, 1001 top 10 number one things. It's everything's number. If everything's number one, then nothing's number one. And so how do you prioritize? And unfortunately, that mission changes between companies and groups and definitely with teams. So that's we're not going to solve that problem. I wish. Actually, this problem has been solved probably a million times around a campfire or over a beer with every guy on a team. It's been solved. Like, we're stupid for even discussing this because it's been solved. However, it hasn't been. And how do you do that? So when you're training these guys coming up, you're going to have if you've got 50 students or 36 students, you're going to have 36 different levels of skill already. So do you start with the basics? I guarantee that they've skipped over the basics or they don't remember the basics. So why is a white dot or a dark dot or a gray dot put on the screen? If you don't understand that concept, then interpreting an image later is harder. Like if you don't understand why there's a shadow and why there's reverb and why is this line horizontal and not vertical, then then you're going to have trouble interpreting what you're looking at. Is it two polar bears fighting in a snowstorm, or is it, a lung curtain that shows lung point of a pneumothorax in the middle lobe versus the lower lobe's fine? Like trying to understand the difference of that is understanding what you're seeing on the screen, and that goes back to basics. And so even if I've run into medics that have done training recently, I can watch them just grab the ultrasound, put the gel on it, put it on the body, and then what is their first corrective maneuver? Like when you put it on there, do they look to see which side of the probe is facing in which direction before they put it on the body? Or can they just throw it on the body, see the screen, and realize that their probe is backwards, and then flip it? So in that quick 5 seconds of them touching the patient with the probe to initiate any scan, I can assess how well they understand ultrasound. And so in that moment, as an instructor, I can change how I teach that person. What do they need? And so that's something that cannot be done remotely. That's something you have to do side by side in class, with hands-on training. And so anything that you learn online has to culminate in that type of training. Otherwise, you have no idea what they've retained. And so that's going to be your biggest problem when you train these guys in a couple of weeks, is taking everybody and wanting to start in with the basics that they all need, but they won't admit, or they don't even realize it. That's the worst part, is like you don't know what you don't know because you know this thing. And if you know this thing, like it's assumed that you know all these things below it, but they don't. And that's the problem. And that's why some people are really good at it, and some people are good at some of it, and some people just plain suck at it. And they don't realize what they don't know. And so how do you train that without embarrassing them or insulting them, but respectfully showing that, this is going to make you a better scanner. We're going to take a couple steps back because, yes, you've done the FAST exam, but you're not good at it. So let's back up. Let's show you a few things, and then we'll make you better. Like I promise to make you better after we do this talk, but you're just going to have to chew a little bit on that humble pie and go, maybe I need to learn a little bit more. Or maybe I was taught one way, but it's just a horrible technique. So it's hard. It is really hard. And when you're teaching soft medics, you have to have the credibility to be able to throw the bullshit flag across the room to where they're not going to get too mad at you. And you have to have the technique to do it so that they understand you're not trying to belittle them or embarrass them. You're just trying to make sure that they can do this the next time when they're the only ones there. And that's an art. That is an art. That is not a science. There is no way to do that in a book. You have to be that student that was humbled and embarrassed, and then turn around and understand how to do it in a more respectful way so that you don't have to overcome the anger for pointing out that they don't know how to do it. That's an art, man. That's not an easy thing.
Plus, you got a bunch of barrel chest and freedom fighters in one room, and you start giving out to one of them, and there's a bit of an issue. So there's an art to say, oh, that's a good way of doing it. Hey, I found this way is a little easier. Let's look at it this way instead of, oh man, you're soup sandwich. You're just completely ate up. What are you doing? And you can't really do that direct approach. And so it's a mentoring more than a instructing.
I think, I mean, and what's worked for me to various degrees is, and I say this sarcastically, is to tricking them to think that I give a shit. And here's why I say that. The easiest way, the easiest way to trick somebody into thinking that you give a shit is to actually give a shit.
Mhm.
And because I do, that comes across. Sometimes better than others, but once again, once they realize that you're not trying to belittle them, you're not trying to show them, it's just that through blunt force repetition, you've figured out a way to do this smoothly and more successfully quicker, and you want them to learn that, yeah, like, hey, I spent hours and hours trying to figure this out. I'm going to show it to you in like 5 minutes, man. I want you to figure this out. And then now you can take this and go further. So, like, yeah, the easiest way to trick them is to actually care.
Hmm.
And it comes across. You can smell authenticity.
Yeah, that's one thing that you can never bullshit your way through anything in SF, and they'll see it a mile away.
You can for a little bit, but you'll get caught. And once you get caught, you can't be uncaught. So just don't be that guy.
I found that with my own learning in ultrasound is I'm a knuckle dragger. I definitely am not the smartest one in the room, and I don't want to be in a room where I'm the smartest one in there. And so I go to these ultrasound courses in the UK, or I'm in a postgraduate diploma in ultrasound for TrotMed, and everyone else are doctors with PhDs, and seeing how they teach. And I'm there as a student, but what they don't know is I'm there watching them teach. And well, I'm passionate about teaching to the soft medics, the knuckle dragger, the guys on the ground. And you can't use that academic approach all the time. You have to come in a different way of doing it. And you're explaining to them why you're doing it this way instead of the academic route of, oh, just, you do this and move on. And the other thing is hands on. I went to a Royal College of Emergency Medicine ultrasound course for 2 days. There was 8 people per probe, and over 2 days, I got a total of about 5 minutes of scanning, and that's fine for doctors in the UK. That's ridiculous. Absolutely, yeah, goes over like a lead balloon.
No, just through trial and error, if you have more than 5 people per station with one of them as the patient, that's without getting into the weeds on that. It's very, yeah. You don't get better at ultrasound by talking about it. You get better at ultrasound by scanning. With guided mentoring is the best way to do it.
Right, and that comes with having an ultrasound probe in the team room instead of having to go to the B team to check out the one probe you have. You just need to have that in your case, and you use it.
Yeah, I mean, I did. I was a dry DMT, and you got to the point. One of the things I take away from that was, the really quick neuro exam on somebody that's been damaged. And the other part is to doing a good exam on everybody on your team so that you can recognize a deficit after an injury. And if you have access to an ultrasound, scanning the dudes, everyone's got something that hurts and aches. And so there's musculoskeletal options. Everyone's had, something that you can probably scan, shoulders, knees, wrists, anything. And just becoming comfortable pulling the ultrasound out and figuring it out. That's the decision process of, I don't know exactly what this looks like, but it's musculoskeletal. So I have the perfect example on one side, or at least what should be normal, the uninjured side of the patient, and then I can look at the injured side and I can tell there's a difference between the two. Just being willing to exploring that process to figure it out and comparing it, because they have analytical abilities just by being graduates of any of the Q courses. Like they can do it. And it's just applying what they currently know to this, what they don't know, and then how do you figure it out? They're good at it. Sometimes they need to be reminded that they're good at it, but they have the abilities, every one of them. That's the cool part. I mean, that's why it's really cool to be in SOF. Like my whole career is you're hanging around where it's very rare that you're the smartest guy in the room. There's always somebody stronger, faster, smarter, more sarcastic.
Better jokes. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, Bill, in this hour, we've managed to do 2 deep dives when we promised we wouldn't be going off into the weeds, but we've managed to have a great conversation on the passions that you bring, and you are now forming that into a doctoral program, a doctorate, and then I look forward to seeing what you can do with that D after your name. And I very much want to get you down to Malta to use this passion and this learning that you have for austere medicine.
Well, I match that desire to see that happen. So yeah, definitely we will stay connected and do this and work together. That's the intent, right?
Well, Bill, my final question for you is this. What advice do you have for the new SOCM, new nurse, new paramedic who is just starting out in their career in austere medicine?
The short answer would be just stay thirsty for knowledge. The minute you graduate, if you're a recent graduate, you consider that kindergarten. You are now about to learn all of the cool things about what you just, you know, completed. It's the same mentality when you graduate the Q course and you get to your team. You're the F and G. You don't know anything. You've graduated the course. You're trained. You're certified. But now you're about to learn what reality looks like. And so how do you apply all that knowledge? So it's the beginning. Just stay thirsty for knowledge.
Thanks for being on our podcast, and thank you for being a friend, brother. You have definitely been motivation, and I've taken a lot of what you have done and what I've seen you teach and how I've seen you teach. I've nicked it, and I've been a better instructor because of it. Thanks.
Well, thanks for inviting me here. And honestly, every good technique that I have, I've observed and, you know, borrowed from others. So some I figured out, but most I've nicked from somebody else like you. So yeah, I think that's a good thing. When you hang around excellent people, that raises everybody up. So yeah, we'll continue to be friends and continue to work, and we'll see who else we can invite and get close and nick their good techniques too. Sounds like a plan.
This has been a presentation from the College of Remote and Offshore Medicine. If you would like to earn CPD credits for this podcast, you can join the Council of Members. Being a member of the college gives you free CPD credit, free access to our virtual field guide, and discounts on our e-learning courses. You can join the team on our college website at quorum.edu.mt.